Hello, this is KD Merchant, and it is my delight to be able to read my book to you, Shattering Red. Before we get started, I do want to say I am doing this in my home. I don't have a professional system set up, so I do apologize if you hear the fans go off in the background, if you hear the refrigerator kind of moaning along, but unfortunately that's gonna be how this kind of is because, I am doing this from home. You may also hear my dog snuffle around in the background, just a forewarning. So, before we get started on the story, I thought I would do a little introduction to it that I never actually gave the story itself, that you may actually enjoy a little bit. So, Shattering Red was supposed to be kind of a really bad joke. So, it is a piece of satire. If you don't like satire, you probably will not like this book. It's very dark satire. It's like horror satire. It is not satire that you just sit and go, ha 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 ha, but you will by the end, hopefully. Hopefully by the end you are laughing. The premise of this story was Luck, Soul, and Wisdom go on an adventure. Soul dies along the way, leaving Luck and Wisdom to figure it out, which is where you get, it's supposed to be pronounced Veda, but it is pronounced Vita in this book because it's actually supposed to be a bad joke about how nobody knows how to pronounce anything anymore. So her name is Vita, not Veda. You have Vita and Faust. If you didn't know, Veda means wisdom, and Faust means soul. And they wind up going on an adventure with Luck. And you kind of have to read the book to see how it turns out. And in this case, I'm going to be reading it to you. So, without further ado, here is Shattering Red. Shattering Red by KD Merchant. Prologue. Old News. Talbot smiled and gave a gentle wave to the father who was walking his young daughter back and forth down the secluded road to the National Archive Hall. He had witnessed numerous parents mollifying their children down this road that didn't offer much to the modern human. That didn't bother him at all as long as they stayed where they were. A wave often kept the populace at bay, and this small family unit was no exception. The daughter brightened and gave an enthusiastic whole-body wave back as she recognized the prominent figure from the television. Good, he thought, as he took the first step downward into the reserves of history's past. This campaign season had kept him busy. Attempting to keep up with the mundane had become nearly impossible, and checking past references to preserve the future had been pushed to the back of his to-do-sos for far too long. He was about to really push the idea of a second surrogacy center into the limelight, and knew it was going to be an uphill battle to get it up and running. The last thing he needed was a smart smear campaign. He opened one of the large glass-like double doors, leaving the gray marble atrium outside and entering the quietude and different grayness of the abandoned records hall. Afthonia's recorded past was rumored, among the few large cities that existed, to be the most complete. As far as Talbot knew, their society was the first to get the newspaper going, and their originators had seen to it that a copy of each piece was saved in an archive. It was rare to see any people down in paper collections unless they were doing research, and not many bothered with thorough research like that unless they were made to do so. The Entomo had modernized life so well that the paper was mostly a dirty thing of the past. Record keepers were all robotic. Talbot was actually very content with the article that brought up the creation event of the Entomo and animatedly squatted, his old knees making audible groans of protest to remove it from its place on the shelf. He removed his government-issued ID from a pocket in his warm gray uniform and inserted it into the slot that kept the newspaper safe. A light went from red to green, and a document in a permanent protective sleeve was ejected halfway from the shelf with a snick. He reached out to grab it. The code from his ID was recorded on a remote log that the public could view on the condition that they had the article in hand. The papers were not permitted to leave the building so that the city's records were kept intact. Preserve the truth of the past was imprinted on the bottom of the protective case between the lock grommets and was a tactile reminder of why he was there. He fingered the saying as he made his way to the second article in the list that followed many of his past familial exploits. He pirouetted ungracefully about until all the documents he needed were bulging in a sloppy arc from his arms to his chest. He toddled to his destination, a tan-colored desk, and spilled his quarry all over the surface. He began to sort the papers into 2 stacks, the most commonly read with the most important information, and the ones that barely counted. He opened his private-owned Tomo and tapped through the programming to open a new note. He slipped the stylus from the side of the device and twiddled it between his fingers as he began his investigation. If someone were looking for links into his familial past, their names would be recorded in the ID log when they took out the article. The first few papers he checked were standard. In fact, he had been the last one to check them out in the last 5 years or so. The second few he went through were not as routine. He was gripped by a sense of quick panic as he saw the name Vita M. Celis documented twice. He licked his old lips nervously as he picked up another of the unnotable articles. They just contained ads for a past relations dental office. That name was there again, recorded in tiny black lettering that felt like a dark tendril seizing his heart. He jotted down the name of the article and the assumed female's name. He tried the next article with a sigh of relief. Several people had looked it over, but none of the name belonged to that particular individual. The next article was out of a more popular selection. It carried a lengthy article titled Nature's Ramifications in Afthonia Daily, 4/18/2059-04. The writing pontificated on global disasters caused by man and how different plagues had wiped out most civilization. It was a fantastic article, full of lots of useful historical information on how Afthonia came to be. Further in the paper, there had been a brief tidbit about his family. His grandfather, Richard Trent, and his 2 researcher compatriots, Samson Malloy and Alec Klein, looked up from a black and white photograph, 3 beaming boys in their early 20s, arms looped around each other's shoulders, ready to foist their radical ideas on the nation. They needed funding for their revolutionary concept, the Surrogacy Center. The article was frequently checked out by students. It was a favorite resource for learning why sighting is important. Talbot's fear resounded around his chest as something new and different popped up here too. The name Verithe Amandeep had been recorded in the log, which had also been recorded on the previous article he had picked up. He added the information to his list and sat back with a sigh. Talbot had never seen a repeated name before, but now he had seen 2 separate repeating people. His stylist flashed as he wrote the name down on his list. He was sure he had heard that name before. His thick gray brows crinkled in concern as he checked a few more articles from the rarely touched stack. There were a few more with the man's name and a few more with the women's. He ran out of the uncommon articles and went back to the popular stack, which only had 2 papers left. One article had both of their names logged. It was a piece from 2061 that showed the now older men shaking hands outside their successful business opening. He frowned and reached for the last article, the most famous, which had naturally generated a mountainous list of names. Numerous people looked for this article because it was marked at the center of a near-magical era, the beginning of the future that still reigned today, over 100 years later. It talked all about the Entomo, and he found himself reading along and forgetting his task for a brief moment. The Wonderful and Terrible Wave of the Future by C.K. Rice. Enentimos Enotios is the man behind the genius of the Entomo. These little devices may seem unassuming in their programmable state, but they are the wave of the future. Molecular programming, which is something only the genius doctor seems to grasp, drives the new tech. Due to patents pending, he is unwilling to share the full workings of the devices. They are solar powered but have huge power saving capacities and require little exposure to the sun or light to recharge. Enodios was kind enough to impart that he designed the energy cells off plants' chlorophyll. They are easy to program, but only programmable once. Entomo can transform into anything your heart desires. Once a person is done with the object the Entomo has transformed into, they're easily recycled by the maker into new usable bots by cleaning units. They will physically transform into the desired object, and they have the same chemical makeup as that desired item. They are 100% molecularly the same, or take on the same look as something but mimic the way it works in a more energy-efficient way. They can be built to be destructive. They can be blown apart. They can be turned into weapons, but only with the proper governmental permissions. These little devices appear to work like magic. Complex reactions are at work here. It's science, not magic. The scientist said as he held his creation. I programmed them to work using sonic frequencies, so anything that was made within Entomo is constantly in connection with all of itself by frequencies we cannot hear. Devices near one another can share information via frequencies. They run 100% green. They are our solution to live clean, free, luxurious lives. Talbot huffed in frustration and sneezed from the musty air as he realized the article had consumed him. He returned to scrolling through the names and found Verithe Amandip inscribed on the list. His pale skin broke out in a cold sweat. There was an article in this paper that also interviewed his grandfather on his success with the surrogacy center, and not so casually mentioned the deaths of Samson Malloy in 2062 and Alec Klein in 2064. His grandfather had spoken to the effect of how sad it was to lose his two best friends in a time that should have been celebrated. Talbot nervously circled the two names on the notepad in red and put a star by Amandip's name, which he could swear he remembered from something. This could be nothing, he thought, as he took two piles and put them in an auto-organization receptacle. Or it could be everything. He made a plan to personally research the names as soon as he returned to his office. Taking a handkerchief out of his pocket, he dabbed at his face after stacking the last document. He could hear the machines very quietly whizzing the articles home, and he heard them land in their appropriate homes. Talbot tried to properly compose himself as he prepared to re-enter the busy side of society. It would not do him any good if his public saw him a sweaty mess. He took one ragged breath, then one more, then resumed his poised political grace. He adjusted his sleeve, tightened his grip, and imagined he shook the remaining nerves out of his hands. Past malice had propped up his composure for years. He pushed the glass doors open, leaving the old news behind to make new. He was back on the street between large, almost flowering buildings above ground. Sounds of society echoed from the next street over, which was much more inviting to a man like Talbot than the quietude of the records hall. He marched, straight-faced, with purpose, back to the hustle of the daily grind. That is the end of the prologue for Shattering Red. If you liked what you heard, please be sure to follow, like, subscribe, and if you cannot wait until the month is done for the rest of the book to come out here on YouTube, please be sure to look for the link below because I will be sure to link you to the book. Thank you so much. Bye.